A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. We will start the day with the poem of the day. This is a poem by Chioma Obemenyo. She's a Nigerian poet, and the poem goes like this. It says, start now, start where you are, start with fear, start with pain, start with doubt, start with hands shaking, start with the voice trembling, but start. Start and don't stop. Start where you are with what you have. Just start. So, this is a very motivational poem which motivates us to start no matter what setbacks we are facing in life. So, in life, several times we face several setbacks and we see several failures, but we always should start with that and use the failure as a stepping stone to success. And a perfect way to even use this poem, for instance, if you may have an essay on the post pandemic world. So, the pandemic has kind of brought the entire world to a standstill. We need to start no matter what at the individual level, at the societal level, the economy, the country, and even at the global level. We need to start with whatever the new normal this pandemic has created. So you could start such an essay with such a poem that we need to start from any time, and we should not shy away from starting even from scratch. So this shows that we have to learn to start irrespective of the various issues that we face. So now with this, we will start with the first topic of the day. So the editorial was enabling people to govern themselves. So, this whole editorial emphasized upon the importance of decentralization and the local self governance in the current scheme of things. So, it says, it opens by saying that the world has so many interconnected problems which are very complex in nature, and it is very difficult and it's not even desirable to come at a one size fits all solution at the global level. So, what we need today is more decentralization and for more effective and empowerment of the people so that they come out with their own local solutions, which provide solutions to their own specific problems. So, the article starts by saying, by quoting some of the proponents of decentralization and what their ideas have been. So, firstly, it talks about Gandhiji, who gave the idea of Gram Swaraj, and he emphasized on the local self governance. So, he emphasized on the panchayats and the village and the cottage industries. So, that was very important from Gandhiji and his concept of Gram Swaraj or local self governance in the villages. Similarly, E.F. Schumacher, who is the author of Small is Beautiful, it also talks about the importance of decentralization and the power of the people. So, this was pointed out way back in the 1970s, and he observed several capitalist and the communist countries, and he says that the economic theories which are adopted in these countries are not very effective in nature. It's the Elinor Ostrom. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Economics in the year 2009. She also made a lot of research on the ground in several countries, including India. And from these research studies, she had developed some principles for the self governing communities. So, all of these, the ideas of these people we just discussed, it points to the importance of decentralization and empowering the people. So, now we will see what is the need for decentralization after all. The first thing is that there are several global challenges that we are facing today. So, be it terrorism or climate change or the current pandemic, there are several global challenges, and all of these are extremely interconnected and complex. We can have environmental challenges, we can have economic challenges, and societal challenges or social challenges. So, these cannot be tackled by their own respective subject experts, and a siloized approach cannot be adopted because I cannot tackle the environment or provide a solution to the environmental problem without affecting the economy, and similarly, a solution to economic problems without affecting the social sphere. So, therefore, a siloized approach is not possible by taking into consideration the subjective experts of these different fields, and developing a solution for each of these different fields is not possible. So, because all of these areas are extremely interconnected, so working or finding out solution in silos is now not possible. So that is why there is a need for greater decentralization, so that at the local level people are able to come out with their own local solutions, local resources. So on the one hand, we talk about globalization, that the entire global level we are facing several issues like poverty or environmental degradation, again climate change, pandemic, or whatever it is. So all of these needs to be tackled at the global level, for which under the United Nations we have developed the Sustainable Development Goals now. So this seems to point in the direction of globalization, where we have a global institution called as the United Nations, under which we have formulated the policies or the targets, supra targets of the sustainable development goals. But however, when you look at the various issues that are being addressed by the sustainable development goals, like poverty or inequality and hunger, we see that for different countries and for different regions within the country, the situation is very different. So if we are looking at environmental degradation as a problem, we need to come out with alternatives through the principle of sustainable development. So this we need to generate more options for sustainable livelihood, and these options can be very different, say for Kerala, and very different, say for Ladakh. These two places cannot come out with similar sustainable livelihoods to tackle with the issues of, say, environmental degradation or unemployment. So that is the reason why along with globalization, where we are formulating SDGs, we also need localization, where we are understanding and keeping in mind the specific conditions of the local regions, and then developing corresponding solutions by taking the views of the people. So by taking the views of the people, the one more advantage we're going to get is that the people will start believing in the solution, that the solution is right for them and it is going to give solution to their problems. And their involvement will also make them feel the owners and further empower them, which is going to be directly proportional to the success of any initiatives at the local level. So any scheme by the government should not be just pushed down the throat of the people, but rather it should be developed by taking consensus among the people. So next is what will be the ill effects of centralization. So the article talks about the role of district collector and how after India became independent, the role of the district collector in a welfare India became that of a paternalistic figure, where he is taking care of the entire district and any grievance of the people is being looked at by the district collector. The government also after being a welfare state, it came out with various schemes for the welfare of the people. So this led to the multiplicity of schemes at the district level. In fact, the editorial quotes about a meeting of the IAS officers and the Comptroller and Auditor General that happened in the year 2013. So in this meeting, one of the district collectors, she pointed out that in her district there were more than 300 schemes that were operational. So forget about the people and their level of confusion as to what scheme is operational and who it is benefiting. She herself found it very difficult and very hard to disentangle the schemes and understand what each scheme is meant for and who is the target beneficiary. So this multiplicity of schemes was there because the government started to provide these schemes, to formulate these schemes from a top-down approach without actually taking inputs from the people. So therefore, the number of schemes increased, while at the same time the problems of the people persisted. So these will be the ill effects of centralization, that because of the multiplicity of schemes, the resources will be spread very thinly, the effectiveness of these schemes will reduce, the beneficiaries won't be benefited, and the beneficiaries will themselves do not know what scheme is operational and for whom. So all of these results in bad governance or malgovernance. So these are the ill effects of centralization. So when we look at the whole article from the perspective of decentralization, we have seen the success of decentralization several times in the previous ICANN videos. So we have spoken about Kerala and how it has been very successful in the pandemic because of the empowered local self-governance institutions. So we have seen the example of how the Kudumbashree self-help groups and the panchayats have come together and how they have been able to organize meals to the migrants in a decentralized manner with the help of these Kudumbashree groups. So how the entire crisis was handled. And also the other day we saw an example of a Gram Panchayat. I'm forgetting the name of the Gram Panchayat, but under that Gram Panchayat, a robot was made in the hospital under the Gram Panchayat's initiative, a robot was made which was able to communicate even at a distance of 15 kilometers with the family members of COVID patients, so that even their anxiety levels can be brought down. And it also reduced the interface between the patients and the medical staff, so that the transmission rate is also less. So that happened under the initiative of this Gram Panchayat. And the same Gram Panchayat also had won an excellence award in the public administration. So this shows how when local self-government institutions are empowered, they can go on to be responsive and also tackle such huge problems like the COVID. So that will actually give a true meaning to the democracy, because we say democracy is nothing but the government of the people, for the people and by the people. So that will happen only when the people are really empowered and they have a say in their own development. Now we go to the next topic, which is India-China-Iran relations. So the content of this topic can be applied in three situations. One is when we are dealing with Iran and India relations. Next is regarding how the China's string of pearls policy, or how its muscular approach in the region is affecting India. And third is about India's strategic autonomy. Now we will see this one by one. So first is that India had an agreement with Iran that India will develop Chabahar port and also a railway line connecting Chabahar to Zahedan. Zahedan comes on the border of Iran and Afghanistan. So if India develops this railway line, then India can also get connectivity to Afghanistan and further to other Central Asian countries. So this way, India can bypass Pakistan if India needs to go to Afghanistan and Central Asian countries. So therefore, India can have better trade relations with the Central Asian countries without going through Pakistan. So this was the whole intention for developing the Chabahar port and the Zahedan rail network. But now India has not been able to take this project forward, and now Iran has said that it is going to spend its own fund, the national fund it is going to spend, and it is itself going to develop this railway line from the port to Zahedan, and that is along the Afghanistan border. So this is a loss for India, because India's access to now Afghanistan through Iran is going to now be reduced, because India is no longer contributing to the development of this road. And secondly, this has also given an opportunity for Iran and China to be more close. And this problem that India initiates projects, but then there are a lot of delays in the completion or implementation of the project, is very similar to the concerns that other neighboring countries of India have, like even Bhutan and even Nepal. So India has started several projects, but there are huge delays in the completion. So this is reducing the goodwill that we are enjoying in those countries. So this is one of the negative aspects or issues when it comes to India-Iran relations. Next is the role of China's policies or aggressive policies in the region. So in the past, we have seen the China's string of pearls and how it is developing various ports across, which is encircling India. So we saw the Sitwe port, and then the Hambantota port, then Gwadar and Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. So now Iran has offered interest to China in developing the Bandar-e-Jazz port, which is just 350 kilometers from the Chabahar port, which India is going to develop. And also China is going to offer the Chabahar duty-free zone to Iran is going to offer China the Chabahar duty-free zone also. So now this, if China it evinces interest in developing the Bandar-e-Jazz port, then it is going to reduce India's presence and influence in the Indian Ocean region and in the Gulf of Oman. So with the development of Chabahar port, India would have had an increased presence in this part of the Indian Ocean region. But the Bandar-e-Jazz port is just 350 kilometers from Chabahar port, and increasing Chinese presence in the region is again going to, the China might dominate in this part of the Indian Ocean also. So this is again something that should be a cause of concern for India. The third application, as I said, was with respect to India's strategic autonomy. So you may have a question like, does India enjoy strategic autonomy when it comes to its relations with various countries? So in this, the reason why India was unable to develop this Zahedan railway project is because United States had levied sanctions on those companies or those countries which were engaging with Iran. So India was kind of, it didn't enjoy that strategic autonomy in this case. It delayed the development of this rail network to Zahedan in Iran because that might have attracted United States' sanctions on India. So therefore, you can use this as a counter example when you are talking about India's strategic autonomy. So of course, you will have to supplement your answer with several positive examples also. For instance, India's intellectual property regime. So in spite of the several years where the United States has put India under the priority watch list in the special 301 report, India has continued to have its intellectual property regime, which balances the public health concern along with the right to have intellectual property. So these are the three applications where the same information can be used. Next is we come to the Panchayati Raj issues. So in this, this is about the Panchayati Raj elections in Maharashtra. Maharashtra has nearly 28,000 panchayats. So out of this, nearly 50%, that is 14,000 panchayats, were supposed to go to elections between March and October of 2020. But because of the pandemic, these panchayats are now unable to go to elections, and therefore, what the government has done is it has asked the chief executive officers of the Zilla Parishad to appoint what are called as administrators to these panchayats. So these panchayats, when they were given the constitutional status, they were supposed to be the directly elected bodies. So they were supposed to be the institutions of local grassroots democracy. But however, there have been several instances which various committees like the second ARC have widely pointed out in the reports that several occasions where the state governments have tried to dissolve the panchayats and try to appoint some administrators, which is against the spirit of grassroots democracy. And also these are supposed to be directly elected bodies, so by appointing the administrators, this concept is again also diluted. So these end up becoming grass without roots. So you have to use such keywords also in your answers, that these kind of measures will what it leads to, the consequences that there will be grasses without roots. So we talk of grassroots democracy, but there is no such thing because the administrators are being appointed in this case. So this leads to a dilution of grassroots democracy and weakening of the Panchayati Raj institutions. So this you can quote as a recent example where the institutions of local self-governments are being weakened by the state governments. So now we talk about India-France relations. There was a 2-page write-up on the India-France relations that covered holistically the relations between the two countries. So we will just quickly go through that. First, we come to the strategic relations. In the strategic aspect, first was that India-France entered into a strategic partnership in the year 1998 itself. So France has always been a supporter of India's permanent membership in the UNSC. So India has always counted on France's support for its permanent membership in UNSC. Similarly, France has been supportive of India's entry into the NSG also, while countries like China have vehemently opposed this, but countries like France have been supporting India's entry into the nuclear suppliers group. So then as a climate change. Climate change has also been a common concern for both the countries, and they are cooperating in the field of climate change also, and trying to develop those technologies which can reduce the climate change and its impact, like the renewable energy. So even in the field of climate change, they are cooperating. Next is terrorism. And India has already faced a lot of instances of terrorism, and even France, for that matter, has recently seen several lone wolf attacks, and also after 2015 Charlie Hebdo attack. France is also one of its major concerns is the cross-border terrorism. And for that, the two countries have been cooperating, and also they are supporting each other in adopting the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism at the United Nations. So these are the various areas under the strategic. Next is the economic partnership. So the bilateral trade between the two countries is 11.6 billion euros. So that is the amount of bilateral trade. And when we come to FDI also, the number of French establishments in India is more than 1,000 in number. So that shows the level of FDI that the France has in India. And when we talk of the more than 1,000 French establishments, there are some very important companies like L'Oreal, Michelin, Veolia, Schneider Electric, Sanofi. These are the very important and very major French companies which are present in India. So Indian investments in France also is estimated to be more than 1 billion euros. So that is the level of India's investment in France. Then FDI flows, the majority of the FDI flows into the service sector, and after the service sector it is the automobile industry, and then it is the drugs and the pharmaceutical. So these are the three important sectors into which the FDI majority has flown. So next we come to the people to people relation, so in which the cultural ties are very important. So in the year 2017 we had Bonjour India in that was celebrated in France. And similarly, in the year 2021-22, India is going to organize Namaste France cultural this festival. So these are the forums for cultural exchange. And then as far as tourism is concerned, Indian tourists who visited France in 2018 was nearly 7 lakh. So 7 lakh Indian tourists visited France, and nearly 2.5 lakh France people have visited India. So therefore tourism is one area where already the relations are strong and which can further be built upon. Next is education. Again, student exchange programs, and many of the students of the countries which are studying in the higher education sector and the other countries is also increasing. So in the year 2019 itself, more than 10,000 Indian students are pursuing higher education in France universities. So this is as far as the people ties are concerned. In the defense ties, in the 2020 Defexpo also, the France made a very strong representation with several big defense companies like Airbus participated, then there was the Dassault which participated, and then Nexter. So these were the companies that participated in the Defexpo 2020 that happened this year. And the Rafale aircrafts also, the agreement was signed in 2016 between India and France, where the deal was for 36 Rafale, which is a medium multi-role combat aircraft. So for this Rafale aircrafts also we have an agreement with and then is a maritime domain. In the maritime domain we have an agreement with France for the Scorpion class of submarines, which are 6 in numbers. So for this also, the Scorpion submarines also, the India and France are cooperating with each other. Similarly, there is a logistic support agreement also, where there's an MOU that has been signed between the two countries for reciprocal logistic support, so that the armed forces of both the countries they can be helped. So this is one thing. And then as a military exercises. So the bilateral military exercises have also been very regularly held, where Varuna is the bilateral naval exercises, Garuda is the bilateral air force exercise, and Shakti is the army exercise. So these exercises have also been regularly held. So these with respect to India-France relations. Next is the police reforms. We'll just quickly have a recap and then see the way forward. So the Vora report, which came in 1993, spoke of the unholy nexus that exists between the criminals, politicians and the police. So next, as far as the criminalization and its extent is concerned, so the report by Association of Democratic Reforms says that it was 30% in 2009, that is the number of MPs who had criminal cases pending or who had criminal antecedents. So that was 30% in 2009 Lok Sabha, 34% in 2014 and 43% in 2019. So, and also currently the Vikas Dubey issue, where there were more 62 FIRs were registered against him that included the crimes of murder and attempt to murder, but still he was never arrested. He was roaming free. So this again is exemplifies how there could have been an unholy nexus between the criminals and the politicians and police. So with this, we will see the way forward. So this article was written by Prakash Singh. So Prakash Singh, you might be knowing, was a former Director General of Police, and it was Prakash Singh's PIL in the Supreme Court that led the Supreme Court to come out with the 7 directives for police reforms. So this article was written by Prakash Singh. You can take the name of Prakash Singh and you can offer some of these suggestions can be included as a part of your answer. So the first thing recommended is that those politicians against whom some serious criminal cases are pending, they will have to be debarred from contesting elections. The second is we need to reform the criminal justice system. So for that, Malimat committee had been set up way back in 2000s, and the committee recommended several reforms in the criminal justice system. These will have to be implemented. Third is the 7 directives which the Supreme Court gave in the Prakash Singh case will also have to be implemented. Next is the institutional reform. So here Prakash Singh says that we need to create an institution which has representatives from the police, from the CBI, from the National Investigation Agency, from the Intelligence Bureau, from the Income Tax Department, from the Enforcement Directorate, so that all of these together, they can monitor the activities of these criminal syndicates and those who are carrying out these organized crimes and be able to take stringent action against them. So we need this sort of institutional reform. Next is we also need a legislative reform. So we have Maharashtra has what is called as a Maharashtra Control of Organized Crimes Act. So these organized crimes and organized criminal gangs have their activities have been on an increase. So we need legislation on similar lines so as to tackle these organized criminal activities. Next is the concept of federal crime. So the second ARC report had recommended that the federal crimes have been on an increase. That is, these are those crimes that are happening transnational or those crimes which have an all India ramification. They are not limited to just 1 or 2 states, but they can happen throughout across the states and also transnational character. So these can include some organized crimes or terrorism. So therefore, we need a law for these federal crimes. So we need to define what a federal crime is, and for that we need to have a legislation. So these were the recommendations that were made by the Prakash Singh as a part of this editorial, which you can incorporate answers. So next is, yesterday I had told you all that instead of a question, I'll be discussing some tips with you. So I sat down to write the tips that I wanted to share with you for your prelims preparation. I thought I'll be talking about it today, but then what I wanted to share with you about prelims, it became so lengthy that I couldn't have sustained it today. So I thought maybe I'll make a separate video just on the strategy for prelims. In this weekend, I'll put it on YouTube so you can go through that. So that's why today there is no question. So that's it for today. Thank you.